and I'd like to welcome you to our temporary edition of First Friday. So we have a presentation today on saving the great white oaks of Marion County. David Craig has been a behavioral ecologist for 30 plus years, focusing his field-oriented research on the response of animals to human-modified ecosystems and subsequent changes in distribution and movement patterns. The work combines life history and physiological and ecological information to address questions related to migration, predation, parental care, and social behavior. Today, David has a particular interest in nuthatches, oaks, and public health, but has developed expertise with many species, including crows, terns, gulls, jays, ravens, plovers, murrelets, squirrels, and grasshoppers. He grew up in Scappoose, Oregon, and attended Lewis and Clark College, the University of Colorado, and Oregon State University before becoming a professor of biology and the co-director of the Science Collaborative Research Program at Willamette University. You can find him on most social media at David P. Craig. So now I'm going to pass it over to David.
Sean L'chaim, David Craig, Nika Yakal, Nika Miklek, Kappa Chimikity, Nika Wawa, Kala Kala Pi Kanawestik. Nika Monk, Comtux, Kappa Willamette School, Ayumlasi, Hayu Comtux, Nika Wawa. Good day. Hello, my name is David Craig. I live in Salem. I talk about birds and acorn trees. I'm a teacher at Willamette University. Thank you for listening to my talk. That was the Chinook Wawa language. And that language is historically the most common language in the Willamette Valley. And so I wanted to use that as part of the cultural intersections that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about people today, people in the past, and certainly recognize our indigenous audience and the people who are here. So that's my first thing there. The talk, Saving the Great White Oaks, what makes an oak white? So I want to just do that really quick. I've got a little cartoon here, red dot versus white dot. You can see in the bark, there's a little bit of red underneath as the bark cracks on the red versus the white oak. The white is the color of the bark relative to the red oak. The red oaks have pointy leaves and the white have lobed leaves. And then the acorns are kind of round in a red oak versus a white oak. Another way that a white oak is connected to its evolutionary history. So this is a diagram called a phylogeny or an evolutionary tree, and it's done in a large circle, which is one way to do this. And this is just to say that there are many kinds of oaks in the world, and oaks are a very old type of organism. Here is an acorn from the Eocene from 33 to 55 million years ago, an acorn found in Oregon. It was like this white oak. So white oak is an evolutionary group. That's most of these oaks. And then red oaks is another big evolutionary group. And then this is a diagram that comes from so many people who care about and are interested in oaks. And so I just want to highlight that oaks are older than North America. They go way back in time, and that they are all around the world, mostly the Northern Hemisphere. And that if we go to more recent times, millions of years ago, there was two big groups of oaks, the red oaks and the white oaks, and they colonized the North America. So millions of years ago, we had red and white oaks in the Northwest. And then thousands of years ago, the oaks that we see today in the place that we live in is really a recent phenomena in some ways. Oaks have been here forever in some ways, and then also just recently with the glaciation time. About 18,000 years ago, things started to dry out. We shifted from conifers, things like Doug firs and cedars in the Marion County, to the place that we are now about 10,000 years ago, when the oaks really started to thrive and have been here since. What makes an Oregon white oak great? There's so many different ways in which they're great. As a person who studies wildlife, it's the type of biodiversity that's associated with this tree are extraordinary. There's probably at least 300 species closely dependent, maybe as many as 1,000 species of organisms that are associated with the Oregon white oak. And we're going to play around with this particular blue jay here, the Steller's jay, and holding this Oregon white acorn. This is a picture of one of many things. Birds, particularly jays and corvids, are really important collaborators of the oak story. And And from a naturalist perspective, here's just some of the great species that are part of that we promoted in the story. I want to say thanks to Brian Rivlin for the J acorn picture. This is a post from the Piscot Arboretum. That's out of our study area today, but the Willamette Valley is full of people who appreciate oaks. Another way in which what makes Oregon white oaks great, this is my neighborhood. I live in Salem, in downtown area, close to the university, and this is the Labor Day picnic underneath an extraordinarily, obviously great white oak. Just beautiful in so many ways, different times of the day, and that big, huge trunk is just sort of one way in which we can think about greatness as well. And then that particular oak is in the Gady Hill neighborhood, and it was in the backyard of, I used to live in the alley just there, and it was in my backyard. And this oak was the signature, a focal point of greatness for a group of a pair of women, Elizabeth Lord and their partner Schreiber, who I'm just forgetting her name. Sorry about that. But this oak was one of those really important trees in the history of that house. And then Elizabeth Lord is one of the first folks to start to talk about conservation of trees in general, urban trees specifically, and then really champion for the Oregon white oak. The other way in which oaks are great, it's true of trees in general, they contribute a lot to our health. There's a paradigm called One Health model, which is the recognition that our personal health of our human population is connected to the health of the other animals and wildlife, and then the ecosystem. And this is the edge of Bush Park, one of my students measuring a tree. There's lots of ways in which trees contribute to our health, but I can talk about it another time. Why save the white oaks? Well, part of the story is we're not worried about Oregon white oaks as an endangered species. The species is very common, it's still present, but what is uncommon, and we do need to think about conservation, in my opinion, is that the large old trees are disappearing quickly, and the ecosystems of which they are a part. So this is a distribution of the first mapping the Willamette Valley back cast about 1850s, and you can see the grassland, oak, woodland, riparian areas are the most common habitat in the place that we all live and in Marion County, and that today those are scarce. Here's another way to look at Willamette Valley oak habitat in a more recent period between 1938 and the 2013. Again, the oaks are vanishing, so we're down to, we still have maybe 2% left, 3%. Other reasons, the intersection of wildlife and the biodiversity, why I say them, there are many species that are highly associated with, and then maybe in some cases dependent on them. This is downtown Portland. Here's that big, huge, beautiful Lord and Schreiber oak. This is where I was living, in this house right here in the alley. Here's my walk past the historic Salem Alliance School off over to Willamette University here. Here's another really big oak. And here's a spot, and we've got another spot up here where oaks are that I'm going to talk about here in a second. So the Western gray squirrel is a particular animal that really likes these. Slender-billed white-breasted nuthatch, acorn woodpeckers. Here's a little story. I was using this site, which is right next to our campus, as a place to tell students about these organisms that are dependent on or really thrive in oaks. And there was some development. That's one of the big changes. Here's that same space again at the today. There's a fantastic rehab facility for the Salem Hospital. They designed a building that was around a really large oak. They thought the oak was great. The construction process, though, injured the tree and it died. This is a spot where we've got a parking lot. I'm going to talk about this tree in a minute. And then here, these circles highlight where just in the last 15 years, 2 really big oaks are lost. Here's a branch that fell from that picnic oak that the Gady Hollow Lord Schreiber House had. One little branch that fell off, and in the complex ways in which we relate to trees and our sense of safety and values at different times, this particular tree was cut down. So that's one of the reasons we want to prize the ones we have left and conserve them. Well, my neighborhood, the Gady Hill neighborhood, during the pandemic, folks were talking about the value of these trees. Made a little video. You can find the Oregon Oaks, a neighborhood legacy. in Gate Hill. This is the kind of story. This is my neighbors. Hi, for any of you who are here. And I want some of the value of these trees is in the way they impact our lives and our sense of a place. And so I'm really keen to collect more of those stories. So put your stuff in the chat if you want to share. I want to be able to follow up with you. So would be the next YouTube, your neighborhood and your sense of oaks. The oak that was cut at the Lord and Schreiber House does have a new Oregon white oak planted. That tree was the very first heritage tree in the city of Salem and by some measures the state. And so we have planted a new tree there to recognize that particular history. I was highlighting another way to think about why I say the great white oaks. They are time machines. They take us to places that by their individual existence, they have a connection to history that goes back to deep time for humans, not deep time for oak trees. There was the little oak tree that was cut down in the Salem Hospital development, and this is just part of a tree. You can see it's only 10 inches across, and when I counted the rings on that, it went back to 1855. I didn't even get the heart of the tree. In Pringle Park, adjacent to the hospital, in an existing space, a tree fell down. This is natural for trees to fall down sometimes. And this just happened a few weeks ago. And that tree we counted back goes back to 1790. This set of pictures here, there was a large ice storm in February 2020, and lots of trees fell down. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. There is a tree in Bush Pasture Park that was an acorn and germinated in 1656. And thinking about what that was like in North America at that time, these are the early American and Spanish colonies in North America at that point, and that tree was an acorn in that moment. So really, I'm going to just throw out these kind of interesting historical facts along with the stories of particular trees to provoke your sense of the connections between the changing world and the value of the trees today. The mention of the way in which we age trees, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and lots of trees fall down one at a time, two at a time. Back in 2021, we had this big epic ice storm, and many trees fell down, including many oaks. And so a group of professors, Karen Erebus and Joe Bowersox, and many students did a huge salvage to collect those trees. And these are some of the things that we learned and how we learned it. The tree rings in oaks are very complex because of this particular cross lignin structures that they have. And so we use microscopes to get really good measures, since we can cross one tree to another tree. And this is just a really quick thing of what we learned, that most of the trees, the big trees, the things that we see in and around Marion County are from the 1825 to 1850 period. That's the really important period in the ecological history of the shift of the Calapooya maintained ecosystems to the Northern European systems. And so there's a lot of trees in that age. They're sort of the settler colonial moment. And then there are trees that are in this pre-European settlement period of time that are also there that are important. So, and one of the things is you can't tell how old an oak tree is based on how big around it is. Bigger ones are usually older than small ones, but not always the case. And so the spatial distribution of trees, these are some of the areas we've been sampling in and around Marion County, a little bit over in Polk County too. I'm going to talk more about Bush Park because that is where we had our largest sample, and it's also intersects a whole bunch of history for Salem, but also for Marion County and also for Western North America. This is one of the ways in which we have the Bush Pasture Park data set. This is when the city gets the property. Back here, 1850s, we'll talk about David Leslie and his development of that property, and we can just sort of track different things about the ecology of the park. Okay, let's go back to that J. This is the J. Stellar's J is one name, Cyanositta stellari is another name, Cala is another name. And I've got a picture here of the J, and this is the official logo for the Smoke Signals, which is the independent media company of the Confederate Tribes of the Grand Ronde, and they use that particular bird for their Instagram for the younger folks and their newspaper for the older folks. And the board chose the Jay in 2019 started using 2020 because the way in which the J represents the oral histories and the way in which it's part of their own stories about myths in Econom. That's one of the official teaching story times in the winter of the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde. And so that's a really neat kind of connection. The jays are almost certainly the bird that planted all of those trees in Bush Pasture Park. And those back in 1656, a jay had an acorn, stashed it, and those trees grew. Another way in which the trees of Marion County and the place that we are connects to those earlier histories. And I want to do a kind of land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgement is one of those things where we talk about the recognition and the importance of an institution and its legacy relative to the tribes of a particular place. And so this is one of the ways in which I'm directing you to the Instagram and the Smoky Signals newspaper. Also, Choctaw is a great museum out in Grand Ronde that you can go to and learn about the Grand Ronde culture, the descendants of the Kalapuya people. And if you do go, they've currently got an exhibit on trees, and it has information about oak trees. And one of the things, if you look in the permanent exhibits, that connects Kalapuya people directly to ways in which we can appreciate today oak trees is a thing that I want to highlight. The term time immemorial, which is often used in land acknowledgements, means the time before memory. And that means that there's no stories from that time. Kalapuya, the descendants of Kalapuya today have stories that connect to great floods that happened in the Pleistocene era. There's great ice dams up in Missoula, Montana. Those dams broke and these huge floods happened. And one of the records of a person named William Hartless in 1877 talked about, and this is a picture of William here. He shared the story. Now the water, the flood came up, and some people, including the large birds, carried them on their backs. They took them to a big mountain, which we know today is Mary's Peak. All those people went to that big mountain there. Now the water was coming up higher. All the country was filled with water. Then Skunk took an oak puffball and made a hole in it. He got inside that, and to be sure, that oak puffball floated to the top of the water. So here's like oak puffball. It's a kind of gull. And so this is one of these ways in which we can go into the cultural history of a place, look for connections, and then see that the stories, one of the ways in which folks were great was they're part of the deepest and oldest stories, probably 8,000, 10,000 years back. The European settlers, when they arrived, this is the kind of idealized space that they saw. This is a drawing from 1845, probably just a little bit north of Marion County, but it's got this open habitat maintained by the use of fire by the Kalapuya people. And then this artist is kind of a little unclear on the leaf types. They're not exactly oaks, but this habit looks very oaky. And then based on the details of what scientists describe at that time, we know there's lots of oaks. In our area, somebody who witnessed that particular time in the Salem area and in Marion County is a person I want folks to know more about or be reminded of is Quinabi. Quinabi was lived in the Salem area or in the Chimichurri area from 1815 to 1883, this really important period of cultural shift. And the stories of Quinabi are notable because they are the last of the Kalapuya chiefs, or the last Chimichurri chiefs, in the way in which Europeans understood them. And his stories were very important in terms of those early contact in the area. Quinabi was buried under an old oak tree on the grounds of Bush Elementary School before it was built in 1936. That's different than the current Bush Elementary School. The historic Bush Elementary was in an area that is another parking lot, a different parking lot for the same hospital. When the tree had a plaque on it that, and when the hospital or when the school was torn down in 2005, that plaque was lost. So if you know where the plaque is, or you know things about that particular tree, or have pictures of it, it'd be great to get those, because we don't know where Quinabi's remains are, and getting a sense of where that tree was could help us connect those histories and do some maybe improve our appreciation of his life in that particular place. If you go to the current Bush Elementary School over on 14th Street, there is an extraordinary great white oak there that is probably contemporary with the trees of Bush Park and the tree that Quanabi was buried under. This tree is one of the ways in which I want to share gratitude for all those people who are doing construction, are building, and they choose to retain these big trees as they make new buildings. This tree was saved by many different people, many different times, including the folks who built the school. I want to go back to the world that maybe the 1850s or the 1656, what that would have looked like. Here is a picture of Bush Pasture Park. I'm going to talk about that more. I've sort of created an ecosystem as it might have been in the past with a Kalapuya, a sophisticated person with all of their trade goods and their sneakers here and all kinds of neat ways in which we know this person was very cosmopolitan for their time. The use of fire would keep this space open. It would promote the presence of game. In that world of the 1830s, this sort of key transition period of the cultural history and the ecological history of our valley, California condor were here, grizzly bear was here, wolves were here. The people were focusing and digging the camas roots and then collecting acorns as major sources of energy and carbohydrates. Today, this is some of my students at that same tree in Bush Pasture Park. It's one of the great teachers in my practice. And more recently, I've been getting to collaborate with David G. and Lewis. If you haven't read Tribal Histories of the Willamette Valley, I recommend you do so. David is one of the key interpreters of our local tribal history. This is a thing that we use from David at Kalapuya seasonal round of how and when people have their traditional practices in the Willamette Valley, how they moved around to different camps, and oaks were an important part of that. And then David is one of the two curators of a exhibit at the Five Oaks Museum called This is Kalapuya Land. And we often, if you see those signs around Salem or on campus, Bush Park, those are things that we're doing in collaboration with those folks. So Bush Pasture Park, and this is one of the first drawings of oak trees. This is David Leslie, and David Leslie is part of the history of my institution, Willamette University. He was recruited as a backup, a reverend, or as somebody to help build the Methodist mission that was part of an Indian labor school that became Willamette University. His house, this is a picture drawn in 1856. This is about 10, 12 years after the Methodist mission had failed in terms of its work with the tribal people. And there's a shift from that space into one more buildings. This is one of the earliest buildings in the area. And again, you can see when he built that house, he saved the oaks. So these would have been, one of these oaks is one of the oaks that was in that 1656 period of time. He sold his property, 100 acres of the property, to National Bush, and that's where the park gets its name from today, Bush Pasture Park. This is a picture from 1843, a drawing of the Oregon Institute, or the Indian Manual Labor School that was founded by Jason Lee and the Methodist American settlers in the late 1830s. And then they through a wide variety of health and management issues, the culture of the Kalapuya people, indigenous people, is being traumatized through disease and changing land use, stolen land, some direct acts of genocide, that kind of thing is happening. Important part to recognize. In that space of Willamette University, and the community is still working to recognize that history. Here's the names of some of those first students at what becomes Willamette University Indian Labor School. And this particular picture, Stumano, is one that was part of a history of Jason Lee going around the country and talking about getting fundraising for the university. These names were elevated by awareness by this person here, Adriana Nicolay, who's a graduate of Willamette University and one of the historic indigenous leaders of the Willamette community, and an alum of the university environmental science major. And then there's a bunch of my collaborators. If you go to Bush Pasture Park, you'll see a sign here about the Kalapuya culture, and these are things we should keep thinking about. A bunch of other folks contribute lots of ways. Willamette University, this is what we look like today. And I'll just note that in 1864, David Leslie set the cornerstone to Waller Hall for those who are part of the Willamette community. Many Willamette students have worked in oak research. This is a group of students a few years ago A couple of them are still around, kind of Appio and Matty Speck. And what we are doing is there was a question just how many oak trees are there in Bush Pasture Park, and what is this place? So we went and walked around and photographed every single oak tree, and we did some basic measurements. If you go to the park, you'll see these tags. If the squirrels haven't chewed them off or the teenagers haven't ripped them down. And what we found was a lot of oak trees. If we were in person, I'd say, how many do you think there are? The answer is we only have pictures of them. You can find them on iNaturalist. Check those out. And then we found 1,134 Oregon white oaks. 286 have a diameter, breadth, height of greater than 2 feet. There are another 64 that are 35 inches or above, and then really large trees were the ones that we were most interested in terms of this kind of deeper history. So lots of data there. I'm not going to go into too much right now, but just so you know. Okay. Another thing we did in terms of the quantitative work, we complemented with qualitative work. We took historic pictures from the park, and this is the thing I'm doing more generally, taking historic pictures from around Marion County and looking at what was it like then and what is it like now. So here's Bush Pasture Park, the house that Asheville Bush built at the same site that David Leslie's house was in 1885. And you can see these oaks here. If you're looking at that same space today, you see a bunch of different trees. The majority of the oaks are gone, and the majority of these trees are ornamental species. There are a few Oregon white oaks there still, though. And then if we're on the front porch, here's a picture from 1900 looking down Church Street there, and you can see that same view there. So changes of space, but you can see these really distinct oak trees, and then know that some of those, one of those is back to 1656. Okay, here's the picture I used for the promotion of this talk, and thanks so much to the Marion County Soil Conservation District for inviting me to do this. This particular tree is one that is at my neighbor's house. This is Ernesto Toskovic's house. It is a house that was formerly another neighbor of mine. The Chaffetz family was there for many years. Here's Amy getting married to Ken, and her parents bought the place. This particular house is notable because it has the largest old oak tree on the top of the hill at a historic house that is famous for lots of reasons. The house is called the Smith Fry House, and Joseph Smith built the house in 1859. That big oak tree would have been there at that time, and all of the owners since then have kept that big oak tree. It's at Oak Street and High Street, and at the time of Smith, the place was called Rattlesnake Hill because rattlesnakes were still part of the Willamette Valley. It was the home for Lafayette Grover, who became a congressman and governor of Oregon. And then Daniel Fry had it for many years after Grover, and was a chemist and hop farmer, big business. And Fry then goes and builds other homes in the Gady Hill neighborhood, switches over from Rattlesnake Hill to Gady Hill in the 1920s. And some of my neighbors live in those houses today. So all of these people and the folks that work for them, we want to appreciate that they retained those trees and that that history is with us today. This particular house is famous for the Chaffetz family did a whole bunch of restoration and to the history of the house, including lots of wallpaper. The Oregonian, when they reported on it, didn't talk about this tree at all. And so this is one of those things that I'm trying to do to create awareness. If we go back to that time of settlement, one of the things too, I was thinking about what is Marion County? Where did that come from in this context of being organized? And also, what's the history of soil conservation? And so it was amazing to discover that the Marion County was among the first counties created with the American settlement process. In July 5th, 1843, it was the Champoeg district, one of 4 counties. And look at the size of these counties. Champoeg County, which is the origins of Marion County, goes all the way to Idaho. We have Yamhill County, Tuolumne, and Clackamas County, 4 counties in what is today the states of Washington, Montana, Idaho, and Oregon. So really big. Those districts were designated as counties in 1845. Salem was the county seat. There's skirmishes back and forth politically between whether Salem or Oregon City would be the seat of this provisional government. Marion County prevails, and the name Marion is attributed to the county in 1856, and that's the name of a Revolutionary War hero named Francis Marion from the first Revolutionary War with the British. And so that's kind of an odd thing. The house is built in 1859, the same year the state becomes a state. And those are just kind of interesting details. Shampooey is a word. Again, I'm working on growing my Chinook Wawa language. It's a Kalapuyan word, champooic, which is probably an abbreviation for a edible root called, more commonly called the yampa. It's a kind of carrot. Here it is right there. And so Marion County, later on, it's named our person, and we end up having a Marion berry. There's kind of funny things about names and food. Shampooey is also an important place in the naming of the spot. Many of you may know about Shampooey Park. This is in Marion County. This is the place that David Leslie, Jason Lee, and those early settlers met to talk about statehood. And in the drawings here of the early village in 1851, yeah, you can see some conifer trees for sure. These trees are probably oak trees. Here's a place in which the people are trying to commemorate and mark the history of statehood. You can see an oak tree in the background, and here's that installation. Again, oak trees are sort of witnessing the history of Oregon. Lots of other things too about how this connects to wolves and property, but I'm not going to talk about that right now, other than to say these open areas are attractive to farmers and bringing cattle, and bringing cattle then pushes the need to control wolves, and then that's the first federal money that the area receives, and that sort of drives statehood. The oak salvage project that I talked about earlier, Willamette University has samples from that particular spot within view of that particular commemoration. And so again, we can go back to that moment in tree time by looking at those trees as they come down. Marion County Soil Conservation District. This is the current map. That's, if you go to their website, this is the user areas. The majority, Becky was telling me that the majority of the work is here in the valley floor in the oak savanna habitat, less on this side section. And so this is the remains. Marion County is the last part of that Shampooey district. Kind of interesting. Let me just go back. Here's that French Prairie area. Here is the city of Salem, Silverton. There's lots of oaks over there, so this is sort of a key area. The history of soil conservation is interesting, at least to me. There's a movement that started with during the Great Depression and the massive loss of soil in the plains area primarily, but it was happening all over North America. And there's a person named Hugh Hammond Bennett, who is the father of soil conservation. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1935, collaboration with Bennett, made the Soil Conservation Act as a way to recognize we were losing our security and our safety by destroying our soils, not conserving that soil. I was curious if Hammond, who primarily worked in the Great Lakes and the Great Plains area, if they came to Oregon at all. And I found a notebook in an archive that he was here in 1937. And here's some, I couldn't find Marion County pictures, but here are some from Yamhill County and Dundee, the wine area. And we can see these oak trees there, this kind of erosion. And it's in that moment of time that people are recognizing the uses of soil, overgrazing, and not thinking about the stabilization of the land that we get soil conservation districts. Oregon starts the legislation in 1939. Tillamook is the first county to have a district, and then Marion County gets going in 1947, and they go to where they are today, where they have their very own building. So thinking about what we have today, I want to recognize what was there in the past. Things we can do in the future. Willamette University students have responded to this connections between people and place and oak trees and all the different cultures that appreciate oaks. And so they have a club called Growing Oaks, and we've been doing things for we're in our fourth year now. We do cultivation of oaks to plant them out. We do workshops on how to propagate oaks. We donate our oak trees to folks. We do oak advocacy. Here's a panel of folks talking about oaks, including people from the wine industry and the Grand Ronde tribes, lots of involvement, community outreach stuff that we do. So check out the Growing Oaks website. We've got a brochure and lots of other resources that you can get. One of the things that's distinctive about this student club is it started out in all of the hardships of 2020, 2021, the pandemic, the ice storms, the fires, and the racism that was happening relative to some of the ways in which events of that time, the murder of George Floyd, that kind of Asian hate because of the connections to China when the virus, all those things. The students were so inspiring. They decided to make a club that focused on the response to that kind of oppression by doing a hopeful thing and growing oaks. And that so many cultures appreciate oaks, and that this is a way to go and do connections and healing. So that's kind of a fun thing. Here's the thing I'm going to encourage everybody to do. Go find oak trees that are around and take pictures of them. Here's one at the Willamette Heritage Center, an oak tree that looks just like the logo. Again, this is really close to campus. Look for historical connections of particular addresses. This interpretive sign is about the people who are working on the railroad, and they have some pictures about the railroad, but in the background, you see the oak trees here. There's 3, and now there's still 1. So this is kind of an invitation to work on projects. Here's another neat thing you can see in sidewalks. If you see a sidewalk that has a big bend in it, but no tree, it probably had an oak tree there because in that period of development, people prized those trees. This again is the neighborhood of Willamette Heritage Center. There's oak trees all over the place. This will be one of the last sort of sentimental trees I share. Here's this beautiful great old oak. I took pictures of it because this is the house that Jason Lee had. It was not at this location, but it was moved to this location. And so this kind of neat intersection of the oak tree and the building. Here again, just glamorous picture of the oak tree and the house. This is a picture that I took in 2019. And again, just gorgeous, gorgeous tree. And then here in that ice storm, that tree fell down. So I didn't know the ice storm was to come, but that's one of those things. By capturing how great it was at that moment, then we could have this backstory, and we can go and appreciate that particular tree. Here's a class showing how big that tree is. And then here's Joe Bowersox and my dad. We're salvaging that tree, and so we can go and get more data out of it. There it is in the lab. If you're cutting oak, you can see this black marks here. This is when metal is attached to trees and it gets incorporated in. It makes that stain. So that tells you this is a cultural artifact of Europeans, and that again, that's part of this history. I want to throw a shout out to the folks in Silverton. They have been celebrating oak trees and building oak tree appreciation. They've got an event they're calling Oaktober, and you can check out their website. And there's a contest to find the large oaks and map them in that community, particularly in the Pudding River watershed of Marion County. And so go check out that. They have a whole bunch of trees mapped like we've been doing in and around Salem. They've been taking pictures of the big ones and then mapping those as a way to appreciate this particular legacy value of these individual old trees. For those who have Oregon white oak, there's lots of ways to go and make them happy at your house if you've got them, and promote them. There's a pamphlet made in 2017 by Wilson and Labe conserving the Oregon white oak in urban and suburban landscapes. So check that out. Ways to design your yard with the best native plants to make a little oak savanna at your place. Wonderful booklet. Planting schedule and all the prep steps to do so. Want to just encourage people to do that. Willamette University is going to have our 4th annual Oak Fest, October 4th to the 6th, 2024. If you're in the area, look for announcements at Willamette University. This is pictures from a couple years ago, and Laura Tesler took some great photos for the Salem Reporter. And we try to do all the senses. We have things you can drink, things you can eat, things you can smell, and tan and smelling. One of the ways, again, the oak trees are cross-cultural. We make Korean acorn jelly from the acorns here. So come join us there. I'll just close and open things up for questions and storytelling. Here's that tree that was on the alley that my neighbors and I celebrated underneath. And at this time, I knew the tree was in jeopardy because it had lost this one branch. And so I took a picture of an acorn, remembering that with sadness, this tree was going to be taken down, but with hope, acorns could turn into these great organisms do so much. And I like to close these talks with a quote from Maya Angelou, who shares, "I can see in the acorn the oak trees. I see the growth, the rebuilding, the restoring. I see that that is the American psyche. There's so much we can draw understanding from. One of the lessons is the development of courage, because without courage, you can't practice any of the other virtues consistently." I like that because as I go out and explore oak trees and communities in Marion County, I see people who are canceling out each other's votes based on the signs they're posting on their oak trees. I see people who probably aren't voting, don't care, but I can see that many people care about these trees and how they connect to the identities of being Americans. And so I want to just put that out as a shared space that we can all appreciate, and that oak trees, Maya isn't talking about Oregon oak trees specifically, but we only have one oak tree in our local area. So this is the way that this is part of our American psyche. So I'll stop there. There's lots of other ways to think about stories. And I'd like to hear some of your stories or answer any questions you all have.
But first, I want to say thank you. That was a great talk, and I'm very interested in it. I love oak trees as well. There are several on my family's farm that's been in our family for over 100 years, and I really appreciate the oak grove that has been left there. As my family has kind of changed the property over years, there's definitely a section that we left as an oak grove. So it's a place that I got married, and we love it. And so we do have some questions in the chat. Rattlesnakes were native here.
Rattlesnakes are native here, and the same way that wolves and grizzlies and condors were native here, and then some of those things have become locally extinct. The word is extirpated, that they've been removed. There are still rattlesnakes in the southern part of the Willamette Valley. If you get down to Eugene, they're more common. There are a few little pockets. They may be in edges of Marion County, way in which the people's real and perceived safety around those rattlesnakes, they killed them. And so, which is too bad, because they're in many places now we know those particular snakes contribute a lot to the complexity of biodiversity. And there are many places in the world where people are comfortable living with rattlesnakes. And so they figure out how to do that. But we lost that moment. And so it's unlikely that people are going to reintroduce rattlesnakes. But that's a thing, again, to think about how and when could we kind of elevate that particular thing.
Another question that we have in the chat. I live in the wildfire area. I lost most of my trees, but 2 oaks may survive. Do you know if they lost most of their lower branches, if they will grow back over time? The trees had been tall and skinny due to competing fir trees, but now they have no competition.
What a great question, and I'm so happy that I'm sorry for the loss of all your trees and the impacts to your well-being during those fires. The oaks are really great adapted to fire, and so that totally fits with what our expectation is. The conifers more often burn, and then the oaks are able to make it through. If they are in a kind of crowded area, they get called asparagus or kind of wine glass shape, and they are not ever going to get lower branches. So they can get a really full crown, and they can grow. They will definitely start to thrive with the absence of competition, and they'll get bigger, and they'll probably start to grow faster, so the trunk will get bigger. But they may sprout some small branches on the side, but they won't get to be those really long, sort of beautiful branches. Those big branches, and why that one picture that I showed of Bush Pasture Park is one of my favorite trees, is those tell you about a moment in time when that was totally open prairie and it had no competitors or no shadows anywhere in that space. And so they grow out there. Bush Pasture Park and many places in the Willamette Valley, those big, huge trees with sidearms end up getting trees close to them, because with the arresting of fire as a tool in the culture of the Kalapuya people, then the trees start to get higher densities. And so, so you won't get new big branches, but you will get a vigorous tree. And then it'd be a great place to plant some trees now for the future. And this is one of the hardest things, because it takes so much hope. Plant an acorn out in the middle of a field, and imagine it getting those big, huge arms and growing. It's not going to happen in your lifetime or in your children's lifetime, but it can certainly happen in ways that will be appreciated in the future.
Great. And then also from the the same person, and we have a response from the SWCD in there, but they asked for a recommendation for a good white oak seedling supplier.
Yeah.
And I had put in our beginnings PowerPoint slideshow that we have a native bulb and seed sale right now. However, we have a native plant sale that I think starts in December. Yeah, that's in the chat there. Starts in December, and then pickup is a month or two later. But the Oregon white oak will be one of the trees that you can purchase through that.
That's I buy some from you all every year, even though we're growing our own, because it's just fun to do. I will say it's so satisfying to plant the little oaklings, and they're so cute. And then if you can afford it, you can get a bigger tree, a larger caliper, like the street trees, or you want to kind of more impact sooner. You could buy larger trees. The very best way though to get a really big tree in 40 years is to plant the acorns. And so plant out and this year we're going to have a okay acorn crop, not a huge one, but get 50, 100, 1,000 acorns and put them in the place that you want, and then they will germinate in the spaces that they're happiest, and then they'll start, and then they'll sit there for a long time. Thin out your seedlings, and so that there's lower competition. And then as they start to get bigger, let them go. That's the best way. There's some great YouTube tips on planting out acorns this way. If you've got a lot of squirrels or other things that might dig them up, you can plant them in cans that kind of have some holes. So, and they kind of cut the sides so the oak, as it gets bigger, can just blow out of the can. That way the rodents can't get the acorn. So yeah.
What do you think is the highest elevation at which the native oaks can be planted?
Really, I don't know the answer to that. I think they're at the top of the coast range in places that uh, I don't know. That's a we'll have to look that up on the internet. How high they go? They probably can go pretty high in lots of different places. The thing that because they're got good freezing tolerance. One of the interesting things when I was doing that kind of deep time about the evolutionary history, the oaks that we have in the valley are basically, and white oaks are the ones that move the fastest. The jays carry them farther, farther, farther each year. And so California has a whole bunch of oak species, and all of them are coming north. But the ones that move the fastest are the ones that the birds like the best. And so after the ice melted 10,000 years ago, then the birds are flying up, and so and going up the slopes. So I think do an experiment. The other thing is right now we're in this big, huge regime shift on our weather and climate and what it's going to be. All of that deep time is important to understand. Oaks are really flexible, and so I'd be inclined to like try them out and sort of try go as high. The high places are going to be getting warmer and different temperature regimes in the next 100 years. So yeah.
We do have another question. How did you prepare the acorn pudding shown in the photos?
That's a great question. We went up to a Korean Asian market up in Beaverton and got the raw materials, and then that's how we did it at that time. You can buy the mix online. It's really oak trees connect so many different cultures. Everything. I've got Irish heritage. There's oak stories there. There's if you're Korean, there's oak stories there. China, uh, uh, Basque country in Spain. Everybody has oak culture almost. If they have any northern European heritage and so, or Asian heritage, and so you can find these things. The Korean oak jelly. I don't know I can't remember the name of the celebration, but it's kind of a seasonal specialty that people do, and it's really really good. I will share too. David Harrelson, one of the cultural resource officers, leaders of the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ron, is really interested in contemporary food using traditional foods. And so we've got a hopeful project of working with to go and start to make some oak jelly out of our Oregon oak acorns, but maybe also make tofu and other kinds of things with fermentation processes and sort of look at what's possible. There's a celebration that's probably going to start being promoted in 2025, the year of the oak and the decade of the oak. And so I'm hoping to continue to learn about and collaborate with people on oak trees because of all of the things they do for health and well-being. There's a particular little bird called the slender-billed white-breasted nuthatch that I want to do research projects on. And so I'll just do that as an open invitation for sharing your ideas or your questions, and that I'm keen to keep working together. And again, sorry for any mistake I made.
All right, well, thank you, David, once again for your great presentation today. I know we all appreciated that, and I definitely personally I thought that it was a fantastic presentation, and I loved listening to it, and the combination of the culture and the nature was really special. So thank you. So thank you all also for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our upcoming events and presentations. And for now, we'll say goodbye.